Are we live? Yay, I think we are.
Yay.
Hello, UK Crime Club. Welcome. So I'm Anna Downs. Let me introduce myself properly. I'm Anna Downs. I'm the author of The Safe Place, which came out in 2020, and The Shadow House, which just came out in paperback not last week, but the week before in the UK.
And I'm Sarah Pearse, author of The Retreat, holding my book up like Anna did. And this came out in the UK on Thursday last week.
Yay, congratulations. And I hope you have one of these. Because
oh my gosh, I'm going to be so unglamorous too.
Oh, dude!
We're out.
Wow, I was running around the house before this. I was going, I have to get a glass of champagne to celebrate with Sarah. Right, well, I'm going to do it for us both.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'll kind of toast you with my water.
With your water. The Retreat, for those of you who don't know, just hit the New York Times bestseller list in its first week, and this is the second time that's happened for Sarah Pearse. Hooray!
Yay!
It's so exciting. Okay. Well, I should probably not drink too much of that because I don't want to be the only person
go ahead
falling over by the end. Facebook users are saying hello everybody. Leslie and lots of people. Fantastic. This is great. I'm glad that you're here. So anybody that's watching, do pop a little comment in or a question if
we can say hello.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're gonna chat about all things. So we've been communicating off and on, haven't we, since the sanatorium, but never actually had an opportunity to do this and chat. So I'm just super excited to talk to you.
Really and I loved your book. It was a little while ago. I read The Shadow House actually, but it was
a while ago.
Genuinely, I'd kind of had a few books I was planning to read, and I remember opening it and just falling in love with sort of I suppose premise immediately. And I think the thing that captured me first off, I suppose, was the eco village. I just loved this idea. So yeah, what kind of got you, I suppose, into thinking about the idea of setting a book in an eco village?
I think probably the same sort of thing that inspires you. I think having read both of your books, I think we gravitate to a similar sort of setting and a similar sort of vibe. And with the eco village, it was very much like I wanted to create a remote location, something very, very beautiful. So the eco village is the setting for it. It's just outside of Sydney, about 2 hours out of Sydney, and about 45 minutes inland from the coast, and it's kind of set in this countryside, very Australian countryside, but in a valley, and it feels very cut off, and the people there are living sort of more or less off grid. So I wanted this place that felt remote, and particularly for the protagonist, who's British born, feels a little bit strange and threatening and eerie, but at the same time, flip side of the coin, really idyllic and beautiful, and kind of represents the sort of person she wants to be, and this dream of somewhere over the rainbow, that she wants to live. That's what she's projecting onto it. But of course, the eco village and the community within it are, they're not quite what they seem. So it's a really similar thing, and similar with The Safe Place as well, my first book, which is again, idyllic place where things are not what they seem, and where kind of terrible things happen, and that there's this kind of, I think with the sanatorium and the retreat, there's also this undercurrent of what could the land itself be carrying, which I wanted to do in the Shadow House as well. Is that where does that for you come from? That sort of slightly, I don't know, it's a little bit mythy, a little bit folklore, a little bit supernatural. Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, I'm really just intrigued. I suppose the kind of key word would be energy. I'm fascinated by the idea that kind of things which I suppose we traditionally describe as inanimate kind of have an energy and have a life, and the past is kind of lingering. And I think in the sanatorium we very much see that with the building itself. I think it kind of becomes this malevolent sort of character.
Yeah.
And the past, even though I think they kind of put this new facade, it's a luxury, kind of beautiful minimalist hotel, actually the past is there, and no matter what you do, it's kind of bubbling up beneath the surface. And I think in the retreat, it's less of a building this time that's sort of holding that kind of creepy energy, but more of actually, as you mentioned, sort of the landscape itself. You have kind of this remote island which was once cursed. It once had this sort of boarding school on it, once home to a serial killer, so a very dark past. And then you also have the sort of rocky outcrop itself, which is kind of in the shape of a reaper, Reaper's Rock. And yeah, I'm really intrigued, I suppose, bit cruel of me as an author to kind of put my characters under that kind of tension you have when you have this sort of landscape which almost feels like it's turning against them, I suppose.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And you really feel that in the retreat. I've been completely stuck to these pages in the last couple of days. I'm 50 pages off the end, so I'm like right in it. I'm almost a bit cross and a bit resentful about this event, because I'm like, can you just let me read?
Let me carry on.
Yeah, but it is so addictive, and so it has that real kind of creepy menace. And it kind of, what you do sort of reminds me of that famous thing that Hitchcock said, which is that a mystery is an intellectual exercise. It's all about the mind, whereas a thriller is all emotion, and it's all it's about giving the reader information, whereas a mystery is about withholding information from the reader. And I think you just really strike that perfect balance. Both of your books are very, very right where those two things meet, I think, because you've got your police procedural, but you've also, as you said, you've got this thrumming energy that comes from what is happening here, which I completely love. Do you do that deliberately, or is that just what comes out?
Yeah, it's kind of what comes out. I think it's sort of that, I don't know if you feel the same kind of thing when you're writing. It's sort of, I suppose for me, it's a kind of book that I'd like to read, and it's probably a little bit of a mashup of all the things I find exciting.
Which is what do you like specifically? What have you read or seen recently?
Yeah,
I love yes, that.
Well, I'm calling to mind kind of some specific kind of thriller authors who I love. So I love Joe Nesbo. He does really great, and that's kind of, I wouldn't say police procedure. I think again it's kind of got very much that sort of thriller aspect as well. And I also love Jane Harper, who does amazing things with
I love Jane Harper too.
Yeah, and I think probably just generally that kind of whole, I suppose, not landscape writing, but just kind of evoking a feeling from the landscape I'm really drawn to. So I suppose not necessarily in thrillers. And I love ghost stories as well. Michelle Paver, both of her ghost stories, it just, captured me and were definitely kind of an influence on the sanatorium. So yeah, I love the idea that something outside of the characters becomes something malevolent that isn't actually a person. And so, that's sort of what I'm really drawn to. But I can't say any one specific thing. I think probably for both books, it was just everything that I love to read in a book. I kind of wanted to incorporate. What did you feel with yours? Was it a similar thing?
Same. I mean, writing The Safe Place was interesting because I didn't know what I was doing. It was my debut. And I think
I love that when you say you don't know what you're doing, there really is that element of that, isn't it? When you're initially writing that first book, it's kind of, very much it's for you, isn't it? You don't know how it's going to be received, and it's so nerve-wracking. You kind of are just striking out into the dark in a way.
Well, I would say less nerve-wracking, because I think with that first one, it's you're hoping that it will get published, but really you are just learning and having fun and playing, and you've got this slight kind of whoa, like wouldn't it be amazing if it did? The second one, I would say, is so nerve-wracking, because again, it's one thing to hope that your book will be published, and it's a completely other thing to know that it will. And I think I didn't find The Safe Place nerve-wracking per se. I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing.
Let's just go for this.
And let's just have fun. And as you say, put everything that I want to see and I want to read and I like in books and movies into one thing. And I didn't necessarily think I was writing a crime book or even a thriller for a long time. I knew that it would have an element of suspense, a strong element of suspense. And but at the time, I remember when I very first started writing, I was reading a lot of Jojo Moyes and a lot like Stephen Fry's books, his fiction and his non-fiction. And I was just, and Leon Moriarty. So I was kind of like, I love that comfortable vibe that they have, where you just fall in love with the characters and just feel it's like sinking into a comfy sofa. And I remember writing thinking, wouldn't it be great if you could, like, or like that there are a lot of other writers that do that, that really put a kind of an edge on that, and it becomes frightening. But I just wanted to push it that a little bit further because I love horror movies.
Oh, you do? Okay, I'm not. Interesting. It's such a funny thing. It's something, particularly with the sanatorium. Everybody asked, "Do you watch a lot of horror?" And I said, "I think for me, sometimes it's almost too overt. I think in a book, your imagination could pull you away. I'm a wimp. Don't ask." With horror films, you can't escape. So I'm impressed that you are, a full-on horror film fan.
I'm a bit weird about it. When I was a kid, and I'm talking, I mean, not small, like teenager, maybe 14, my favorite movie was Psycho, and I would watch it over and over again. And I used to really love excuse me, frog in the throat, Poltergeist and Nightmare on Elm Street. And I was way too young to be watching them, but I was like, this adrenaline rush and this kind of creep factor is the best ever. It just gave me all of the feelings. And so I guess I really want to bring to my stories that kind of not so overt, as you say, but just that real thrum of energy of a threat, but a really, like with a serial killer novel, the threat is the serial killer.
Yes, yeah.
But with what I really like to see and read is you don't know what the threat is.
Yes.
And again, with a Hitchcock quote. Oh no, it's not Hitchcock. I think it was Jordan Peele I saw in an interview just recently, who was talking about how effective that is in terms of sparking your reader's imagination. And as you just said, it's so much more powerful when you just hold back and hold it back. What is that thing? What is that thing? What is the threat? What's the monster? And don't, try and leave it as late as you possibly can. And I feel like the more I write, the more I want to lean into that. The Safe Place was, I think, much more character driven, but I'm feeling much more that I want to go through into that vein. I really love.
One thing I was going to ask you actually was around the sort of symbols in your book, and I think that sort of threat, even though, like you say, you're not naming exactly what it is, you have hints at that with kind of the bones and the doll and the blood. Kind of what lent you towards sort of leaning on those almost? Yeah, well, they are symbols, aren't they? They're symbols of something threatening.
They are. I had that really early on. So with again, it was a whole second book syndrome thing. With the Shadow House, I was really frightened. I didn't have fun writing that book, or writing the first draft anyway. I was just so scared, and really felt the pressure of the deadline. And how when you're a debut, it feels like you've won the lottery, and that you've been invited to this incredible party, and then they kind of say, that trick that you just did, do it again. And you're like, I don't know if I can. So I kind of had this, Stephen King's words echoing in my head right with the door closed. So I wrote this full draft, and it was 90,000 words that I knew did not work. It was really frightening, and I had to ultimately hand in to my team and say, I'm so sorry, this really doesn't work, and I know it doesn't work, and I don't know what we're going to do. And they were beautiful about it, but they said, no, you're right, it doesn't work, and we're going to have to
oh my god,
nightmare. But pull it apart, and these are the things that do work, and these are the things that don't. And I think a lot of the things that remained from that first draft was those kind of images and the symbols that could mean anything, but meant something very specific to me, and about how stories.
Hello, Donna. Sorry, just looking. Say hello.
Oh, hi, Donna. Donna Morfitt. Hello.
Yeah.
So how we create stories, how our brain creates stories out of things that we don't understand. And so yeah, it was a reflection of that amorphous threat, but also people trying to make sense of something and almost again like stamping something on the land. I'm
But I
trying
do think
to,
there's just something innately just genuinely creepy about the whole sort of idea of genuinely the things you chose, the bones, blood, obviously overtly, and doll. I just, yeah, instantly from the get-go I found that quite a kind of, and then you have the older person appearing, don't you, who,
yeah.
yeah, there's just, I think there's a feeling of sort of threat from anywhere. And I think as a mother, kind of Alex from the get-go kind of feels that, doesn't she? So she's arrived there, like you say, it's meant to be a fresh start, but yeah, she's kind of feeling that threat, and it seems to kind of almost be coming from all kind of quarters. People at the eco village aren't particularly friendly or welcoming, or at least not everyone. Yeah, I don't know whether I'd be sort of hightailing it out straight away.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that I was really drawn to kind of ritualistic stuff. That's what I was kind of trying to draw on. And I don't know if have you seen The Sinner, the
I
TV
don't
show?
know.
Oh, I'd really recommend it. It's brilliant. They use a lot of kind of imagery where you're playing on reader slash viewer expectations, and you're kind of drawing on those tropes that we
Yeah.
recognize as being threatening, and in order to kind of misdirect and steer, but yeah, create that energy. I think if I was Alex, I probably would have got out of there fairly quickly. But then again, with the thing is with her is when you meet her, she's got a baby and a
Yeah.
teenager, so it's kind of double whammy of parental nightmare. And I think at the point at which we meet her, she's so desperate to stick in one spot, and she's chosen the eco village for a really specific reason.
Yes.
And so she's just so determined to make a crack of it this time. And she's also, when we meet her, she's proved her mettle by escaping from an abusive relationship. So she's got some balls, and she's like, okay, no,
Yeah.
I've made this decision. There's something happening here, and I'm not going to be
Easily
cowed by it. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm
like
not going to be
she's not.
intimidated because I
I
don't believe that there's anything woo-woo happening,
Yes,
is
I
her
think she
thinking.
shows a kind of real strength. And like you say, where you're sort of meeting her with the baby and with the teenager, I think she has so much to juggle. But I do think you kind of see that inner strength in her sort of the whole way along. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, actually, you kind of touched on about the sort of deadline and things. Was this linked to the pandemic at all? Were you writing the book during that period? Was it, I know for me it was challenging. Was it for you?
Oh my God, so challenging in ways that I sort of didn't expect. I mean, there was that whole thing where we were going, oh great, we can stay at home. We're also lucky to have a job where we can stay at home and write. But I've got two small children. We had to homeschool, and actually just the whole sort of low level anxiety thing really got to me, not just because of the whole second book syndrome, and that was a big deal. I was just really putting a lot of pressure on myself, but also just the general thrum of fear and the unknown with the pandemic, and not knowing when we would ever be able to go anywhere again and see my family and all that. And that there is I think there is a real thread of that through the Shadow House, which is somebody who's very separated from her family, and it
Yeah,
feels
yeah,
very isolated in that sense, that she can't get to them. She doesn't have a
yes, yeah.
support network. How about you? Like, I mean, what was your second book experience like? I feel like you were just like, boom, done, mic
No,
drop.
no, not at all. I was probably like one of the many authors who was kind of saying to her editors, "Could I have a little bit more time?" It was genuinely, really, yeah, like you say, with your debut, you don't have those sort of time restrictions. And with this second book, yeah, the pandemic hit, and I was kind of juggling. I was just used to being on my own, I suppose. I'd had the children at school, my husband kind of obviously working in an office, and away, and then having sort of everybody home was so challenging creatively. I think it would have been fine if I'd been at a different stage with the book. When I'm editing, obviously I focus, but I think I'm using a slightly different part of my brain.
Yeah.
When I'm kind of making new words, as it were, I need that kind of silence. All I have is my cats, and now dogs, kind of at the end of the bed, and I'm typing away. And yeah, I found it so hard. And I found my writing time was squeezed into what should have been sort of my leisure time in the evenings, which isn't my natural time to write, and also weekends. And yeah, I just needed a lot more time. But I think a benefit maybe of the pandemic, and this was just something I was discussing at an event last week, I think that kind of isolation, which is a theme in the retreat, I think definitely worked its way subconsciously into the book. I don't reference the pandemic at all in the retreat, but I think those kind of, as you said, the anxiety, all of the fears and emotions we were all feeling, have worked their way into the book, which, yeah, that was one plus side to it. But I'm quite glad for writing this one. I think it's going to be a little quieter.
God, are you really speaking my language? It's yeah, very much with the unnatural times to write. So with the safe place, I had babies, and so I was kind of writing in soft play centres, and I was in playgrounds and on trains, and just where I had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and write then. But with that, there was no pressure of time, and I was like, it kind of was my leisure time, because it was the thing that I did to make myself feel worthy or worthwhile, or whatever the word is, to give myself some sense of self-worth outside of motherhood. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, definitely.
But with the second book and the the obligations and the pressure and the expectation and the consequences, the enormous consequences if you don't get it done, or at least that's how it felt to me. I was back to squeezing in writing time in those unnatural times. As you said, I don't write very well in the evening. I'm just really tired, but needs must. And it just felt very like pressured and awful, but you just kind of had to do it. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think it's really bled through my writing, and it sounds like for you too, and I'm sure lots and lots of other writers as well have really felt that. It's I think we're still seeing a lot of processing of the last couple of years spilling out into stories and books. It's really interesting. So one thing I really want to ask you is about the level of detail in your books, particularly with Ellen, your your police protagonist.
Yeah.
So I'm such awe of crime writers who really make me feel like I've lived a day in the life of a copper. It's just absolutely unreal, because I just don't know where you're getting the research from. Like, it's amazing to me. And I interviewed Dervla McTiernan recently, and I asked her the question, because I feel like her Cormac Riley series that are set in Ireland, they are so, like, the detail in it is so intricate, and you genuinely feel like you've walked a mile in Cormac Riley's shoes. And I said to her, I was like, I'm really in awe of that. That's incredible. How do you do your research? And do you spend a lot of time in small provincial Irish police stations? What do you do? And she was like, I don't really do anything. I read some reports. I get the language. Or in fact, she reads a lot of reports, to be fair. She really sinks herself into that language. But she said, I feel like I have a contract with the reader that kind of says, that I'm making a lot of this up. I know that I'm making a lot of this up. And is it, we will meet in the middle and it will be okay.
Yes.
And I found that genuinely quite game changing, because I get really caught up in the authentic details and like, no, but I have to get that right, because someone out there is going to be upset if I don't get that detail right. But she was like, nah, no, we're kind of writing entertainment fiction. And fiction is made up and it's okay. Is that the same with you? Like, how do you write your police stuff?
Most definitely. And I think when I kind of came into writing Ellen, there was a sort of, I suppose, a big decision over whether she would be a detective or not. And I was, again, I suppose like you, a little bit almost hamstrung by the thought of, do I need to know every single detail? And I quickly realized that you don't, I don't think, particularly if you are writing a straight police procedural. I think there's an expectation perhaps within the genre that every single detail is correct, and I like to think with the crime scenes, etc., because I've done a lot of research with my police contact, that it works. But there are definitely elements that you don't know because you haven't genuinely sort of walked a lifetime in the shoes as a police detective has, like my contact has. And I think one of the things, interestingly, when I spoke with him, he reviews my manuscript for me afterwards.
Wonderful.
And I think it's wonderful. But he also kind of is very much, as you were saying about Devlin, that kind of sense of it doesn't have to be exactly as it would, particularly in a thriller. The time scales are so going to be so different as to what they would be in the real world, and you couldn't make an effective thriller in that sense. So I think he was kind of, you know, as long as we get the key details right, there are elements obviously that are up for flex. And I agree in the sense that, yeah, you have to kind of know that the reader will sort of understand that. I don't think they can expect it to be exactly by the book as it would be, because it probably, I think he actually, Stuart, my contact, says it would probably be a very boring book if you did everything and ticked every box as he would do. But yeah, I think it's important to have the authenticity of a scene and understand who is there, how they would move around that scene. I think all of that is key. I think you need to ground the reader in understanding what's going on. I think it's more in terms of timescales, etc. And obviously pressure you put that detective under, which I do in the book, obviously by the fact a wider team can't get out to her.
I was just going to say that's a really good inclusion, that they're desperately, you know, that the body count's ratcheting up, all of these things are happening, but they cannot get anyone out to help them, so it's just her and Steve.
Yeah, and that's a question that we kind of went backwards and forwards on a lot. How realistic would that be? And I think one of the interesting things he said, due to kind of, I suppose, budget cuts and that kind of thing, he said actually there would be scenarios if there were major incidents. You know, it's a priority call is often made. You know, where would there be more casualties? Where is that resource needed? And no, it wouldn't happen for days and days and days where someone couldn't reach them, but it might be for a few hours. So I kind of played with that idea a little bit and found it actually quite scary.
Really? What do you mean? Like putting yourself in that position?
Yeah, putting myself in that position. I think, you know, if you are a detective and you are in that isolated location, an island, there's a storm, you can't easily get yourself off that island. What would you do and how would you feel? And I think Ellen feels that pressure just as she did in the sanatorium. I genuinely feel the pressure of my characters as I'm writing them. I think it's a line in the book where it says kind of pressure cooker ready to pop. And I think, Ellen, you're feeling that with her.
Yeah, well, I think you really feel that. And going back to what I was saying about emotion meeting the sort of the intellectual, I think you do that incredibly well. Your characters, particularly in the retreat, have such intricate backstories. Hey, like you've really given everybody such nuance and texture, and I love it particularly because I'm so drawn to stories that deal with the aftermath of trauma, and so everybody in the retreat and everybody in the sanatorium as well, but particularly I'm literally right at the end of it, so it's very fresh in my mind, but I really love how everyone's dealing with something and it's all kind of stitched together in a really beautiful way. But that aftermath of trauma thing, is that something that you find yourself going back to again and again? Like what makes you want to write about that?
Yeah, I think the idea of kind of what's happened in the past, I think as a society, it's really interesting. I think recently society has become a lot more open to the idea of discussing what happens. But I found generally with things I've experienced and kind of people close to me have experienced, people aren't very comfortable, I think, discussing it. And I think on a very sort of superficial level, people kind of, there's an expectation in our culture to move on very quickly from things. An idea that I think is woven in, oh, you go to therapy or you talk about it and you're over something. I really don't think that's the case. I think people's past trauma kind of stays with them and actually stays with them for life. And I think how you cope with it and how you deal with it changes and evolves, but it's still there. I think this idea that you can kind of get over something is actually really deeply unhelpful. And I think in the book, one thing I'm so love about writing sort of crime thrillers is understanding and unpicking why someone would commit a crime and what would lead to them to the point. And it's not always that case where you have a serial killer who's mentally ill, etc. It's kind of ordinary people sort of pushed to their breaking point.
Yes.
And without saying too much in the book, we have this kind of group of family and their partners who travel to the island. And yeah, I was kind of weaving together that sort of story of secrets and lies and sort of, as you mentioned, sort of trauma that's built up, but characters and sort of people within that family group have tried to gloss over, and how does that person make them feel about that, the idea that their trauma's ignored, I suppose.
There's a really I think you kind of mentioned that really well, kind of you slide that in every so often. I think Ellen says at one point, you know, everybody deals with their trauma really differently. It can manifest itself in so many different ways. Abusers have often themselves been abused. And I think it's I'm finding more and more that crops up in crime thrillers in a very compassionate way. I'm really enjoying reading a lot of victim-centered crime thrillers at the moment. I think there are a lot of really amazing kind of intelligent stories out there at the moment that really explore all of those things that you just said, you know, but you know, from the point of view of a victim as well, and talking about how crimes affect people's lives long term. I think it is my obsession too in writing stories, is kind of looking at a surface situation and peeling back the layers to say, well, what would make somebody do that? Because, you know, it seems horrendous. But when you peel back and find out what's happened to them and how they've been made, I mean, it doesn't excuse it, but it certainly gives us all something to think about, I think, as members of society, definitely. To say, well, you know, what are the larger ramifications of things like that? How can we prevent these things from happening again? Because it's not just, is it, like writing crime? It's not just, ooh, what's, you know, who would do that? It's not like a morbid fascination. I think it's, some of it is exploring your own fears in a safe way. But I also increasingly think that it's a really helpful thing for us to do. It's, you know, using storytelling to unpick mistakes and to try and move forward and find out, you know, what are the kind of systemic and social issues that bring these things, you know, bring these circumstances about, you know.
Absolutely. And I think that why is exactly as you mentioned. It's the kind of fascinating thing. I think you often, one of the things I'm quite intrigued by is kind of, you have those sort of partner crimes, husband and wife, and what leads someone to kind of to that point of wanting to do something. And I think I find interesting is that sort of build up of how that person perhaps changes over time. Would they have done something at one point but layered up over years? You kind of perhaps erode that sense of self, and you then are able to commit the crime or do something you never thought possible.
I think guilt as well is, I just read a book that was dealing with guilt and blame, self-blame as a big thing, in terms of a certain kind of mind will do anything and go to any length to actually change the narrative in their own head to justify certain actions and to kind of wipe clean that horrible sense of guilt and blame. I think that plays a little bit of a role in the retreat as well, doesn't it? Kind of people feeling responsible for things that they've done or haven't done, which I thought was quite an interesting angle.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's lots of things. I think you see the characters kind of, I suppose, within the book, as you say. I think probably they haven't done is quite interesting. Things that they should have done, things where they should have perhaps stepped up to the plate. But I think, I think there's a lot of, I suppose, expectations on people when someone is experiencing a trauma. And I think, I suppose one of the things the characters sort of experience is how much do you expect people to empathise? I think as a society, we used to kind of, perhaps there was a more focus, perhaps because of religion, on kind of those values of where you help each other out and you support and that kind of thing. Whereas as I say now, I think it definitely does happen, but I think there is a society kind of, it's all about moving on in a way. Yeah.
Well, it's good stuff. Hey, are you a big plotter? How do you work your plots out? I feel like this one's really intricate. I'm like, how's she done this?
yeah, I'm kind of probably a mix between the two actually. As sort of when people say plotter and pantser, I do think with a thriller, and I don't know about you whether you do it any differently. I do need to have an idea of where I'm going, but I think
Mm.
there's definitely elements as I'm writing where the kind of characters will take you to a different place that you hadn't imagined, or kind of even just dialogue between them sort of moves the book in a different direction. So you need to have room for that. But yeah, I definitely know where the book is going and a rough idea of kind of who done it. But yeah, I need to sort of plot things out quite carefully, and I tend to do it sort of longhand in a notebook. I don't know, what
I
do you do?
do. Yeah, I do the same. I find I can't really think unless I do that. My thoughts start kind of popping around and branching out and mutating unless I kind of write as I think. So I definitely do stream of consciousness stuff. Like, so
Yeah.
my journals will read things like, what if there's a this, that, and the other question mark? Could
Yes.
could it be this? Maybe it's this. Oh, what if there's a thing? Blah 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 blah. And I then work it out that way. And I very rarely go back and read what I've written.
Mm.
It's like just kind of working it out as I go along, unless because I'm also at the same time doing a lot of research and writing down thoughts as they come to me. And I've got a little system where I kind of write the thoughts that I've had that might contribute to a plot twist, or might kind of layer a character in a
Yeah.
particular way, and then the rest is sort of in a different style, and I just kind of free fall with it.
Oh, I like that idea. You're kind of doing it in a kind of ways to make it clear, I suppose, in your own
Yeah,
mind between the
yeah.
two.
But
Yeah.
I also I do a lot of sticky noting. Like
Oh,
I
you're a
use
sticky noter. I often see
oh
on social media people
yeah,
actually with these amazing kind of walls of sticky notes.
yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't be so organized. I don't think it's good.
I'm just very visual, I think, and it's I from what I understand, it's how a lot of screenwriters write.
Mm,
How they put their stories together. So if I can see the shape of the story, that really helps me. But as you said, like, I did that with the that awful first draft of what became the Shadow House, and I was like, this is great, this is watertight, now I'm going to write it, and it just fell apart. So there's
okay.
such
Yeah.
a lot to be said for uh, giving yourself a lot of room and the freedom to kind of let the characters and the energy and the forward
Mm,
motion of the story inform where it goes. Like, a bit like a dream, we'd love to be able to control our dreams, and I think some people can to a certain extent, but I think you do, to an extent, just need to let your subconscious do
yeah.
its thing.
And that's a question I was going to say to you actually around sort of timings and deadlines actually, because the retreat, I had to have my deadlines pushed back because of life and circumstance. And actually, I think it became a better book as a result because I
Mm.
had more space from it. Had I stuck to my original deadline, I think a lot of the layers in the plot, a lot of what I learned about the characters, um, just wouldn't have made it into the book. I didn't
Mm.
have wouldn't have had that headspace from it. Do you think that's important? Do you think kind of writing a book a year for you is a, I don't know if that's the schedule you're on, is something plausible?
No, it's not. No, flat no. I think when I first signed my first deal, I think that was something that everyone was hoping might be the case, and I was
Mm,
like, yeah, great, yeah, I can do that, no problem, fine. Quite quickly realised that it's certainly for me at this stage anyway. I'm still working out how I work, um, and what the best, most efficient way for me to lay my
yeah,
ideas down is. I'm still grappling with the concept of deadlines and how they work. So at the moment, definitely not. But I think that there's a lot in that for me anyway, I do a lot of creative thinking. Like, I'm not necessarily laying words down every day. And I think it's just as valuable for me to go out on a big walk, or for me to, like, sometimes I'll be in the supermarket and I'll go,
mm,
oh my God, and I'll write that down. And you don't get that necessarily if you're sitting at your desk the whole time pushing for those things. I
yes,
think you
yeah,
have to let things rise to the surface a little bit. And sometimes, I mean, at the end of the day, it is a job, and you can't be
mm.
so precious that you're sitting there going, "Oh, just going to let the muse visit me, and the
Yeah,
the work
the
the work will
infamous
get done."
muse.
Oh no, it is a job, and you do have to just get the work done. Sit in the chair, do
Yeah.
the time. but there is also this beautiful, magical thing that I think you have to allow for the ideas to rise to the surface. We don't actually know how they happen. We don't really know how the creative subconscious works. And I sometimes liken it a little bit to, like, if you're kind of furiously catching butterflies, you're going to scare them away. But if you sit quietly, they'll come and land on you. And I feel that's so true. And I didn't know that or recognize that so much in writing The Shadow House. I'm now in the middle of writing book 3.
Any spoilers on what it's about?
Yeah, I'll tell you what it's about in a second. But no, it's going really well. It's much more comfortable, but I think it's because of that. I think that I recognize now that there is a balance, and while I need to set myself really clear writing work boundaries, I also need to allow, if I'm having one of those days, and I know you know what I'm talking about, those awful days where you feel like it's terrible and it's awful, it's gone to shit, and it's never going to work, and you're banging your head against a brick wall. Kind of thing. But I now know enough to trust that it will be okay, and I actually just probably need to just back off and go and do something else, and it will come back. And that's quite a hard thing. It's a hard lesson to learn, particularly if you are somebody that likes to control and plan, and it's definitely not a comfortable place for me to be, to go, like, just generally in life, to say, oh, let's just see what happens. But that is kind of what you need to do, but within that framework and that kind of structure that you set for yourself. Book 3 is really good. I'm really excited about it. It's going really well. It is about a woman traveling solo in a camper van on the coral coast of Western Australia, between Perth and Exmouth. They call it Exmouth up there, not Exmouth.
That's why you said Exmouth. Yeah.
I know that. I've lived in Australia for 11 and a half years, so I definitely have some of their pronunciations now. But yeah, so she's traveling that distance. It's quite a big journey, and the landscape changes enormously as you do that trip. You've got coastal cliffs, you've got desert, you've got sand dunes, you've got gorges, crazy gorges, you've got turquoise blue waters, and you've got outback, and so she's traveling alone, doing that trip, trying to find out what happened to her sister, who died mysteriously 12 months earlier doing the same trip.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that sounds scary.
And there's a lot in it that is I am, again, just, I think, leaning ever more into that sort of horror adjacent space, but ultimately character-led psychological thrillers. It is what I'm doing. But it was really cool because I planned out this whole plot, and in a very organic, but also using my sticky notes, but in a very sort of, this could happen or that could happen, and it felt very kind of flowy and lots of movement for all the butterflies to settle and everything.
Oh, lovely.
And I came up with this story and sent it off to my team, and I got great feedback, and planned it a little bit more, got a little bit more feedback, which I didn't do with the second one at all. So already it's feeling more comfortable in that sense. And then I went and did the trip. So just recently, like about a month and a half ago, I traveled to Western Australia, and
So this is not where you live now then? This is sort of, you've gone to a different...
Yeah, so I mean, Australia is enormous. I live in New South Wales, which is just north of Sydney, and I flew 5 hours to Perth, so the other side of the country. And I rented a camper van, like a whole decked out, converted van. It was a Toyota Hiace, which is exactly the van that the character in the book has. And I did that whole journey and back again, and basically lived the story. It was phenomenal.
Oh,
it was
that's amazing.
It was
you can
unreal.
get the level of detail then, can't you, that you wouldn't otherwise?
Level of detail and authentication, but also, I don't know, like, some weird things happened that made me feel like I'd manifested some stuff. Like, I know it sounds a bit woo-woo, but there were little things like I'd imagined in a particular setting, I'd imagined these little piles of stones, little cairns,
Ooh.
and that came from somewhere completely different. But when I got there were little stones, little by the side of the road that people like. It was a whole thing, really like bone white stones, pebbles that people stop and build them, and so they're just
Oh God.
all built up at the side of the road. There was another thing that happened. I had a scene where my protagonist was sitting in this camper van looking out the window, and she sees this little girl on the floor kind of engrossed in something, and she goes to have a closer look, and the little girl has an insect in her hands. She's kind of, the insect's kind of jumping and
Yeah.
she's going to get it, and I swear to God, I saw that happen from my camper
Oh,
van window. It was raining, and we were at this like crazy outback station, this cattle station. I looked out the window and there was this little girl in the rain on the
oh my
floor doing
gosh.
that on the ground, trying to catch insects. It was bonkers.
That's that is weird, isn't it? Perhaps, yeah, I don't know. Who knows what happens? The
Oh,
energy manifested something.
maybe it did, or maybe it's just, I don't know. But it's very, very cool to be able to do that. And I think, I'm working in a much more like in a slightly different way now. So I'm almost layering my plan rather than having a plan and then start writing
I
from
see.
the beginning. I'm kind of
Yeah,
still layering it, so the plan is growing and becoming a
yeah.
draft, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's interesting. It's interesting
Yeah.
to hear how sort of process evolves, isn't it? I think with your first book, as you say, you're sort of striking out into the dark. But I think as time goes on, you find a method, I suppose, that works for you. But I do think it depends book by book and by circumstances. Like in the pandemic, we both work differently. And I think, again, perhaps in sort of slightly calmer circumstances, you find perhaps which will be more your sort of natural method, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And I think that's a lot. Uh, that's the joy of being having the opportunity to be in it for the long haul, to kind of write more than one book, so that
Mm,
you really learn how you work and your brain works and how you're best, and how you're most efficient. I think it's brilliant. um I don't know if there's anybody out there that has any questions, but if there
yeah.
are, maybe pop them in the chat box and we'll try and answer some, because I feel like we've been talking and
I know.
talking and talking, and it's
I
like
do.
we've been going for 50 minutes. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, do let us know. Otherwise, I think we'll probably call Kaz back in about 10 minutes or so. But what was I going to say? Your plotting is next level in this book, but I think also your chapters are a bit shorter than they were in the sanatorium. I think maybe that's
Yeah.
me misremembering it, but the propulsion and the kind of page turny and the cliffhangers that you leave at the end are really well done. Is that something that you've kind of thought, I'm going to do that this time, or is that, again, is it just the way that it's come out?
Yeah, I think probably the way that it sort of emerges. I think I really like to sort of, as again, I suppose in books that I like to read, I think the kind of tip of kind of um, going into the action quite late and leaving quite early is probably key.
Yeah,
I like being able to feel like you want to move on, and I think it's something. Yeah, I suppose quite naturally, I look at a scene and think, where could I leave it here? And quite often
yeah,
it's earlier than I'd actually originally planned, but it definitely works better. And I've had a few circumstances with my editors where they've suggested a cut, and you think, yeah, that's the right point. So that's something I think I'm still honing though.
oh no, I loved it. I think we did it brilliantly. So we have got a few questions coming through, which is awesome. All right, Sarah, have you ever acted out a scene as you've written it?
Yeah, not I wouldn't say it physically acted, but definitely in my head. I was doing a chat actually for the US yesterday with the author Flynn Berry, and we were discussing almost like method acting, and how when you're, well, me personally, when I'm sort of know a scene's going well when I'm writing it, I really am in that scene and I'm living that moment. And I think if someone would tap me on the shoulder, I'd kind of like almost jerk away outside. And I think that's when I know sort of the writing's going well. And it's often those scenes where I feel like I'm absolutely there, can live and breathe it, are the ones which get changed the least
Yes,
by my editor. So
yes,
like you say, that the muse, you don't have that all of the time, and you have to kind of crack on. But yeah, those scenes where I, from the minute I feel that I'm there, they're the most sort of visceral and the ones
Yes.
I love to write. But yeah, sometimes it doesn't happen. You've kind of got to work at that. But yeah, definitely, I feel as if I'm acting it out.
Well, I do. I mean, I don't know if you know, I used to be an actor, so I was trained at RADA and was a professional actor for 4 years in London before deciding that the lifestyle was probably not. I couldn't handle it, to be fair. But I use a lot of my acting training to get that same sense of immersion and depth of character. Physically acting it out, I know, like, I'm always trying to reach past the low-hanging fruit in terms of description. So if there's a particular emotional state that a character has, I will sit there and try and emote it, try and bring it on, and then try and describe it in a different way, in a way that I haven't heard it described before, or or even just how it genuinely feels to me, or if there's a sound that somebody's hearing, I'll go and make that sound, or I'll just to say, well, how can you put that into words? And that's been really interesting for me, because as an actor, you're using your voice and your body to tell the story, but with writing you only have the words. So that's been a real kind of shift for me. I don't get up and walk around and say the lines. I say dialogue sometimes, and I sometimes try and put myself in a situation and improvise. Like, I'll try and do a bit of improv to see what the most natural way of saying something is. Oh, it's interesting. I could talk about that for quite a long time. All right, we'll do a few more. What are your most memorable moments as authors so far? When did you feel like you made it, Sarah Pearse?
Oh gosh, I don't know whether you ever feel like you've made it, but I think probably genuinely most memorable moment was kind of before my book was due to come out in the US and the UK, and I found out I was a Reese's book club pick. Yeah, that was just, thank you. Yeah, no, it was life-changing moment, and just every sort of, not dream come true, because I never imagined it would ever happen, but yeah, that for me was just huge. And then kind of waiting for that moment for it to be announced and kind of everyone's reaction to it. Yeah, it was something I'll always remember.
Oh, that's beautiful. I think one of my biggest ones was right at the very beginning, when I submitted to agents. I got an agent, this wonderful agent, several agents indeed, and they'd gone out on submission, and this was the Australian submission. And I remember getting our first offer in, and we were lucky enough with the Safe Place to get multiple offers, but the first one that came in, and their sort of pitch for it, never do you think that anyone's going to pitch for your book. That's ridiculous. Yes. You're like, surely I should be begging you. But the pitch that they wrote, and that, they were like, we're going to do this. This is the kind of marketing we would do. This is and I remember I called my mum, and I was in Australia, and it was England, I think 5 o'clock in the morning. I called her, and she obviously picked up the phone thinking it was an emergency. And there I was, sobbing. And she was like, are you okay? And I was like, it's going to be big. It's going to be big. They want to put it on a bus. Like, just flabbergasted, because
that's lovely.
You think, I would be happy with just somebody printing 20 copies and just 20 people reading it. Exactly. That would be great. But for it to go around the world was just insane. I love those. Amazing moment. All right. God, there's a few now. What live in-person events do you have coming up? Sarah, are you doing any? Are you managing to get out?
Sadly, I've actually kind of already done them. So last week in the UK was my publication week, so I kind of travelled around and did a few. I don't have anything coming up, but possibly for the paperback, maybe. Yes.
Oh, that would be good. Would you get to the States? Have you been to the States?
I haven't been to the States. Maybe one day. I kind of, I came out in a tricky time sort of during the pandemic.
Oh, of course.
I do a lot of sort of virtual events for the US, actually, with sort of bookstores and things. So haven't been there. Maybe one day.
Yeah, same with me. I have managed to get to some festivals this year, which has been amazing. And it's been so lovely to have been invited. But I almost forget that that's why that we came out in the pandemic. I've had 2 books under lockdown, and just haven't been able to go anywhere, which is just completely mental.
Insane.
Yeah. All right, one last one. What has been your best reads of the year so far? Oh, that's a tough one.
I can step in, actually. My favorite crime read of the year so far, and I'm trying to think if it came out this year. or whether it came out last year, but I only read it this year, is Stacey Williams' book, In the
Yes,
Dark.
Like You're in the Dark. I loved it.
Yeah, no, I just think she's an exceptionally talented writer.
She is.
And it was just really, really an immersive book. I was genuinely there in kind of, I love books probably set outside of the UK that I can kind of fully be swept away by. And yeah, I love that book. I'd recommend it to anyone who kind of, it's character led, but yeah, it's also very propulsive. Yeah, compelling book. Yeah.
And very dark, and the setting is fantastic as well. That sort of real
swampy Louisiana, you get that kind of heat, and I think it comes from the fact that she knows the area so well. The authenticity there is amazing, and I've read her new book as well, an early thing, and I absolutely love it.
I'm jealous of that. Very jealous. I'm going to get my hands on it. I'm just having a quick look through some of the books that I've just read recently. I've read so many. I think, like I said, one of the best books that I read was Notes on an Execution, Danica Kafka, which was again when so good. It's about a serial killer on death row, but it's looking back at his life through the eyes of the women around him. And again, it's that, you know, peeling back the layers in a kind of in a way that exposes how people are so wronged by society, or like how people slip through the cracks, and that, you know, I think as well pointing out that the lives that these people touch and take are sometimes infinitely more interesting, and they deserve a voice. I thought it was the most beautifully written book, and I'm reading.
I'm going to have to put that on my pile.
It's really good.
I love a really good recommendation.
Oh, well, the other one is, if you haven't already read it, is Katie Gutierrez's More Than You'll Ever Know, which just came out.
But I've actually got it, so I'm really
please read that. I'm it's one of those ones.
Sorry, I've just seen someone said Notes on an Execution is brill in my books of the year. So read it even more now.
You and me both. It's so brilliant. And More Than You'll Ever Know, Katie's book. Katie is just an incredible writer, and it's one of those books that I'm taking really slowly because I just love every page. And it's about true crime, and it's about a woman who she had a double life. She was married to two men, and one of them killed the other, and it's about the nature of true crime and why we're so interested in it, and all that. And it's just gorgeous, and it's full of heart and love, and I just kind of don't want it to end. It's beautiful.
Oh, that's lovely. That's a great recommendation. So that'll be going to the top of my pile. I can see, right. Okay.
Oh, wait, you have 4 minutes left. Please remind us of your books before we end. Let's do it. Let's remind. Have you got your book? I've got yours. I'll hold yours up again.
Yeah, I have.
Let's hold them both up.
Both of my books, actually. So The Sanatorium and The Retreat. Yeah.
And I don't have The Safe Place kicking around. That was my first book, called The Safe Place. I'm in the UK at the moment in my mum's house, and it's chaos. But I do have this. This is The Shadow House, my second book, which just came out in paperback in the UK, and has that lovely quote from you on it. Yay! If you can see that at all.
Thank you cover.
So much for that. Honestly, I want to take you out for a drink at some point when it's possible.
We have to meet next time you're in North Devon. We'll have to do a meet or a bookshop, a combined event when we.
Please let that happen. I would love that. I would love that. Yeah. No, it's been it's such a delight to talk to you and get to know you. I feel like we could do this for about another 3 hours.
I know, exactly. I couldn't believe where the time's gone.
I know, I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my God, it's 10:02. How did that happen? Oh, well, if there's no other questions left, maybe I don't know if we sign off or if Kaz comes back. What should we do? Maybe we'll just say thank you and good night.
Yeah, thank you to everyone.
Yay. And huge congratulations again, Sarah, on your incredible achievement. 2 New York Times bestsellers. Very well deserved.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'm going to